Hi, my name's Amaros. Last Saturday was supposed to be the day I walked down the aisle, the day I became a wife. My dress was already hanging in the corner of my room, steamed and perfect. The chairs were lined up in neat rows, waiting for laughter music and vows. The playlist was carefully chosen, each song tied to a memory of love and resilience. On the surface, it was all ready. But beneath the lace flowers and polite smiles, a truth had been rotting for months. What my sister and parents didn't realize was that while they mocked the man I loved, sometimes behind his back, sometimes even to his face, I was listening. Every word cut deeper than they knew. They dismissed him as quiet, as if silence meant weakness, as if restraint meant he was less of a man. What they didn't understand was that quiet doesn't mean small. It means steady, strong, present. And they never expected that I would stand at the altar, lift my head, and cancel everything. But I did. What pushed me to that breaking point? How long had they been trying to erase him? Erase us from the life I was building? Let me tell you exactly how it happened. I can't remember the last time my mother truly looked at me and saw me. Her eyes always seemed to pass through me like I was glass, fragile, transparent, but never precious. Breakable? Yes. Valuable? No. That Saturday, the four of us sat down at Magnolia Inn, a Southern-style brunch spot tucked inside the historic district of Savannah. It should have been warm, comforting, familiar. Instead, it became the stage where everything cracked open. Leland and I arrived early. He had pressed his shirt that morning with the same care he gave to everything, quiet acts of love that most people overlook. The kind of man who notices when your glass is empty before you do. The kind of man who refills your water without asking. That's who he was. Steady, gentle, present. Then they came in. My mother, Verlaine, floated into the room like she owned it, wearing a linen suit far too crisp for the sticky Georgia heat. She moved like she wasn't walking, but performing. My sister Callista followed behind, sunglasses still on despite being indoors, her presence loud even in silence. And then my father Dorian, trailing last, his eyes glued to the glowing screen in his hand, as though brunch was just an inconvenience interrupting more important things. We lasted 6 minutes before the first cut. Verlaine placed her napkin across her lap with surgical precision. "Leland seems nice," she said, stretching the word nice like it needed to be dissected. Then with a soft smile that wasn't soft at all, she added, "I just hope, darling, that you've really thought about what this marriage means for the family." Before I could even breathe a reply, Callista jumped in. "Maybe she's into fixer-uppers," she quipped, sipping her mimosa like it was champagne and not poison. Leland smiled faintly, the kind of smile that masks discomfort, but I felt the way his hand shifted slightly beside me. I tried to laugh it off, reaching for a cup of coffee I didn't even want just to fill the silence. But then my mother leaned forward. "Sweetheart, you could have had anyone. Anyone. You were always such a bright girl. I just hope you aren't settling." Before the shame could fully sink into my skin, Leland spoke. It was the only time he did that entire meal. "She's not." His voice was calm, firm. A rock placed in the middle of a storm. The rest of brunch blurred into clinking cutlery and the hollow sound of my family's voices drowning out the space where love should have lived. Verlaine dominated the waiter, Callista filled every gap with stories of her latest campaign shoot, and my father only looked up when prompted, nodding absently before retreating back into his emails. When dessert came, my mother slid a folder across the table. "These are the updated wedding logistics," she announced like a CEO distributing quarterly reports. "Venues have been moved to Rosewood Estate. Callista secured it through a client very generous. You'll love it. Rosewood." I blinked. What happened to the vineyard? It was too rustic. Callista waved her hand dismissively. Not the right vibe for our crowd. Our crowd. I opened the folder and flipped through page after page rehearsal schedules, catering choices, seating charts. Not one of them reflected the wedding Leland and I had spent weeks shaping together. It wasn't compromise. It was erasure. It was theft. Finally, my father looked up. "Your mother's just making sure everything's perfect. You know she's good at these things." I bit the inside of my cheek until the metallic taste of blood reminded me I was still alive. I nodded slowly, outwardly, obedient. Inside, though, a quiet decision had begun to bloom, and that decision would carry me to the altar not to say I do, but to say enough. After brunch, Leland and I walked back toward the car without speaking. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was sharp like glass, balanced on the edge of a table, threatening to fall with the smallest push. Spanish moss hung low from the old oak trees, swaying gently in the savanna air, but the city's usual charm felt staged that afternoon. The cobblestones, the pastel facades, even the golden light on the sidewalks, it all looked like theater lighting. Bright. Pretend. He opened the car door for me as he always did, but he didn't get in right away. He stood there, one hand on the frame, the other resting loosely at his side. His voice was quiet but steady when he finally asked, "Do you want this wedding?" My throat tightened. I wanted to answer quickly to reassure him, but the words caught somewhere between my heart and my mouth. "I want us," I whispered. He studied me for a beat, then nodded, not pushing for more. That was Leland, never forcing, never demanding. He simply reached out and placed his hand gently on my shoulder, grounding me the way he always did. "I can handle them," I added, and I meant it. At least I wanted to mean it. We drove back through downtown past the square where he'd first kissed me under a canopy of lights strung between lampposts past the bookstore where we once ducked in to escape a storm, laughing as rainwater pooled at our feet. The landmarks were still there, unchanged, but I couldn't feel them anymore. It was as though someone had drained the color out of my memories. I was already somewhere else, drifting toward a place I hadn't wanted to admit existed, a place where doubt grew like ivy, wrapping itself tighter, with every word my family spoke. That evening, we walked through Forsyth Park. The air at dusk was painted with that golden gray haze I usually loved. The fountains sparkled faintly, children's laughter echoed from the playground, and the paths glowed under the street lamps. But I couldn't find peace in it. Leland didn't speak. He didn't have to. He knew I was still replaying the day in my head like a script I couldn't rewrite. "They just need to see you the way I do," I said. Finally, my voice breaking the quiet. He stopped walking, looked at me for a long moment. His eyes held no anger, no defensiveness, just truth. Maybe he said softly, or maybe they already see me. They just don't care. I couldn't answer him. I wanted to deny it, to insist love could change their vision, but deep down I knew he was right. That night I sat alone on the couch, the house hushed around me. My wedding notebook rested in my lap, the same one that had once thrilled me with possibility. Its pages were filled with swatches of fabric sketches of centerpieces I had planned to make by hand, little notes in the margins of what flowers meant what. It had been mine. Ours. Now, as I flipped through it, felt like someone else's dream. Verlan's handwriting bled across the margins, tidy but cold. Callista's messy annotations scrolled through like graffiti, bold and invasive. It was as though they had branded my life with their approval, leaving no space for mine. I turned to the calendar, my eyes landing on the date circled in pink. Our wedding. Except it didn't feel like ours anymore. Not mine. Not Leland's. Theirs. I whispered into the silence. How do you disappear from your own wedding and no one notices? My eyes fell on a sticky note, my name written in loopy script, Omeros. I peeled it slowly from the page, the adhesive tearing fibers of paper as it came loose. It didn't belong there anymore. Tears slipped down my cheeks without my permission. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall one by one into the gap between the notebook's pages until the paper was damp and curling. I left the notebook on the table and didn't touch it again for 3 days. It sat there, wide open, half scribbled, half sabotaged like a wound I couldn't bring myself to stitch closed. I moved around it, ate beside it, cleaned the counters while avoiding its gaze, but it haunted the air like smoke after a fire. Then, Thursday afternoon, a package appeared on my doorstep. Heavier than expected, wrapped in shimmering gold foil paper and tied with a white silk ribbon. No card, no note. But I didn't need one. I already knew. Inside were the final printed invitations. I had chosen a simple design months ago, a minimalist cream with sage green accents, soft and timeless. But the stack I pulled out was nothing like that. The font was ornate swirling and gilded the borders metallic and loud. It screamed luxury and status. It screamed them. My hands trembled as I held the first invitation. Ms. Omaros Delane and guest. Guest. I blinked hard, convinced I had misread. I opened another envelope. The same. And another. My hands grew cold as I rifled through the stack, each card driving the knife deeper. Not a single one mentioned Leland. Not his name. Not even his initials. Just a faceless placeholder beside mine, as if he were an afterthought, as if he were disposable. I dialed Callista with shaking fingers. She picked up on the second ring, her voice drenched in laughter and the clinking of glasses. "Oh, hey," she said too brightly. "Did you see the invitations?" "Gorgeous, right?" "They don't have Leland's name," I said flatly. There was a pause. Then her voice shifted into that chirpy false cheer she used when cornered. "Oh, that." The printer couldn't adjust the spacing in time. Totally cosmetic. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. I didn't answer. Because in that moment, I knew this wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. And it was the moment everything inside me finally snapped. My silence on the phone was met with Callista's breezy dismissal. "Look, you're the bride. No one's reading the fine print. Trust me." Her words felt like ice water poured over a wound. Before she could say anything else, I pressed end and let the line go dead. I didn't say goodbye. A second later, my phone buzzed. One notification. A single winking emoji from her. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I didn't open it. I couldn't. That evening, I boxed the invitations back up their gold edges and hollow words staring at me like accusations. I slid the package under my bed, out of sight, but not out of mind. I didn't throw them away. Throwing them out would mean admitting I had accepted what I'd seen, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. The next morning, I drove out to Rosewood Estate for the final walkthrough. The estate was grand in the way postcards are grand, impressive, yes, but distant. A sprawling, white-columned mansion draped in ivy, every detail so polished it felt untouchable. Exactly like the brochure. Exactly like a set. The staff were already at work when I arrived early. I followed the faint hum of voices and footsteps into the main hallway where decorators were arranging a long table beneath a glittering chandelier. My breath caught as I realized what it was: a memory table. A timeline of my life displayed in framed photographs carefully arranged for guests to admire. Baby pictures, school plays, my first ballet recital, high school graduation, college parties, smiles with my parents, posed portraits with Callista, dozens of Callista. Her face filled the table like ivy climbing every corner. And then jarringly, a photo I hadn't thought about in years, me and Eli, my college ex, laughing at a football game, arms thrown around each other as though we had belonged. But Leland, not one. 3 years together, vacations, birthdays. Christmas mornings, Sunday coffees on the porch. Dozens of pictures. Hundreds. And yet here, on this curated shrine to my life, he had been erased. My chest tightened with every empty gap where his face should have been. Every frame that screamed his absence louder than any insult. The click of heels cut through the silence behind me. Callista breezed in latte in hand, sipping casually as if this was all routine. "Cute, right?" she said, gesturing at the table without really looking. My throat burned. "Where's Leland?" She didn't miss a beat, eyes still on her cup. "You two barely take photos." I used what I had. I turned slowly toward her. My voice was quiet, sharp as glass. "You had plenty." Callista smiled, lips curling like I'd just praised her. "It's not personal. It's just aesthetic." Before I could answer, the front doors opened. Leland walked in. He wore a navy blazer, simple, understated, but sharp in that way only he could pull off. He carried himself with quiet dignity, not show. His steps echoed as he crossed the threshold, but then he froze, his eyes landing on the table. On the absence. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. His gaze didn't plead, didn't accuse. He didn't frown or raise his voice. He simply nodded once. The kind of nod that says, I understand, and I'm done. Then he turned slow and deliberate and walked back out the door. Callista's voice broke the silence behind me, but it sounded distant, muffled like background noise in a theater. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't care. I drifted into the reception room where staff were fussing over floral arrangements and adjusting chairs. The space was undeniably stunning, high ceilings, sweeping windows, a white piano gleaming in the corner, but to me it felt staged like a set designed for a play, a tragedy waiting for its curtain call. I didn't run after Leland. I didn't call his name. I just stood there, numb, watching strangers arrange the backdrop of a wedding that no longer felt like mine. That evening at home, we ate dinner in near silence. The scrape of silverware on plates, the clink of glasses, the low hum of the ceiling fan overhead. Those small sounds filled the room louder than conversation ever could. After we cleared the plates, Leland poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from me. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and then asked quietly, almost carefully, "Do you feel like you're disappearing?" His words pierced through me, cutting straight to the hollow I had been trying to ignore. I lifted my gaze to meet his, my voice trembling but certain. "Yes." He leaned back, eyes steady on mine. Not angry, not resigned, just truth. Because from where I'm sitting, you are. I didn't cry. He wasn't blaming me. He was naming something I hadn't dared speak aloud, giving shape to the ghost I had been becoming. I reached for his hand across the table, held it tightly, grounding myself in the only thing that still felt real. No words, no vows, just pressure, just connection. "They want the wedding." I whispered the words, tasting bitter in my mouth. But what I meant was, I want you, and I'm terrified of losing both. "Not the marriage," he said softly, nodding once before letting go of my hand. Then, without another word, he gathered the dishes from the table. I watched him walk into the kitchen, his back turned his shoulders, carrying a weight heavier than they had that morning. A quiet heaviness that wasn't just from exhaustion, it was resignation. I stayed seated, frozen in place, trying to remember what it once felt like to belong to something I chose. Not something dictated, not something shaped by other people's hands, but something born from my own heart. The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold on to water. When the dishes were cleaned and stacked neatly away, Leland disappeared into the den. He didn't look back. He didn't call for me, and I didn't follow. Instead, I folded myself onto the couch legs tucked under me, staring at the empty coffee table as though it might offer answers if I just stared long enough. The apartment was hushed. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you almost hear it. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock kept time, joined now and then by the muffled hum of a neighbor's television through the wall. I didn't want to break it with music or fill it with words or even reach for comfort. What I craved wasn't distraction. It was clarity. And that's when the doorbell rang. I startled, heart jerking against my ribs. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door there, she was my mother Verlaine, perfect as always. Her expression cool, her posture impeccable. Nonchalant, almost smug. Flawless makeup. A silk scarf knotted at her throat with military precision. In one hand, a pale blue gift bag. In the other, a flat rectangular box wrapped neatly with ribbon. "I thought I'd drop this off," she said breezily, stepping inside before I could answer. Surprise. I didn't ask what it was. She carried the box to the coffee table and, with the slow elegance of someone unveiling a work of art, untied the ribbon. The lid lifted with a whisper. Inside lay a wedding album, already printed, already bound pages pressed with photographs. She beamed at me, expectant, like applause was owed. I expedited it so you could see a sample before the big day. Callista picked most of the layout. She has such an eye, doesn't she? My fingers hesitated on the cover, then I opened it. Page after page, memory after memory. Me as a child, chubby cheeks and bows in my hair. Callista on stage at her first dance recital, lights glinting in her curls. Family vacations at Hilton Head sandcastles and posed smiles. My graduation cap tilted grin wide. Callista's engagement party. Callista's birthday brunches. Callista. Even our family dog's third birthday had a page, but Leland 2 photographs. Only 2. One was from our engagement shoot. His face partly lost in the shadow of a tree branch, almost an accident. The other zoomed out, buried in the background of a group dinner, blurred and unfocused, like he didn't belong in the frame at all. I flipped through the rest quickly, my pulse rising with every blank space where he should have been. Nothing. No Christmas mornings, no porch readings, no trips, no Sunday breakfasts. It was as if the last 3 years had been scrubbed away. As if he had been erased like a pencil mark someone tried too hard to rub clean, leaving only a faint smudge of what once was. Verlaine watched my face, carefully mistaking her cruelty for curation. She tilted her head almost kindly. Well, your moments together are quiet. We didn't want to disrupt the aesthetic. Something inside me fractured at those words. Quiet was what made him beautiful. Quiet was what made us us. I closed the album without a word. The sound of the cover shutting was sharper than I meant it to be. She mistook my silence for agreement. Good girl, she murmured, patting my shoulder lightly as if sealing the deal before gliding out the door as effortlessly as she had come. I didn't touch the album again that night. I placed it back into the box, slid it to the far corner of the room, and sank onto the couch once more. But this time the silence pressed harder. There was a weight in my chest that refused to move, like an anchor had been dropped behind my ribs, dragging everything down with it. The next morning, Leland and I drove to Rosewood for the final walkthrough. Neither of us mentioned the album. He didn't ask and I didn't bring it up. The silence between us had grown into something solid, something with edges and shape too delicate to prod without drawing blood. Rosewood looked perfect, picture perfect. The kind of perfection you frame on a postcard but never actually live inside. Manicured lawns that looked painted on, white pillars gleaming in the sunlight, floral archways already half installed, roses bent into submission by wire. The planner met us at the entrance, clipboard clutched to her chest, smile bright and chirpy. Her voice carried a rehearsed cheerfulness that felt jarringly out of place. "Let me walk you through the layout," she said, like we were entering a showroom instead of my future. And I walked in already knowing this wasn't my wedding anymore. Everyone had been assigned their dressing rooms as if the entire estate were a chessboard, and we were just pieces being moved into place. The planner's voice was chipper rehearsed, like she had said the same line a dozen times already that day. "Callista has the north suite. Your parents will be in the bridal garden room." Then she stopped. Just a beat too long. A pause heavy enough that it made me lift my head. And I asked, already bracing myself. She cleared her throat and pointed down a narrow side hallway where the walls were plainer, the lights dimmer, the air colder. "Mr. Hallbrook will be in the prep room near catering. It was the only space left after your mother finalized the placements." Leland's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. It was the kind of expression someone wears when they've already predicted the punchline. "So I'm on the catering team now," he said lightly, though his tone carried the weight of something else. The planner's face flushed. She stumbled over her words, desperate to fix what she hadn't meant to break. "Oh, no, of course not. It's just logistics, you know. Nothing more." But Leland didn't argue. He didn't roll his eyes or press her further. He only gave a polite nod, that quiet kind of surrender that speaks louder than any protest, and walked a few steps away. I followed her into the reception hall, though my body felt heavier with every step. The floral team was arranging centerpieces so extravagant they looked like they belonged in a royal museum, not at a wedding. Chandeliers had been lowered for cleaning their crystals, catching the light in shards that felt almost mocking. A pianist sat at the white baby grand playing scales, testing chords. It should have felt like magic, like the fairy tale I was supposed to be living. Instead, it felt staged, manufactured perfection on a set where I had been cast without an audition, expected to perform lines I'd never agreed to speak. After the walkthrough, we returned home in silence, a silence thick enough to be its own presence between us. Neither of us dared touch the wound we both felt opening wider. That evening, when Leland disappeared into the shower, I found myself drawn back to the box I'd sworn I'd leave closed. I pulled the album onto my lap, fingertips tracing the edges before opening it. This time I turned the pages slower, not searching, because I already knew what I'd find, but needing to see it again. needing to confirm that the erasure wasn't just in my imagination. Page after page, moment after moment. Life after life, carefully curated, but always without him. And there, in the two rare photos where his face did appear, he was either blurred or swallowed by shadows, as if the universe itself had conspired to make him forgettable. A sharp ache settled in my chest. Leland had spent years making room for me, protecting my space, amplifying my voice even when I hadn't raised it. And yet I had stood silently while they erased him one glossy page at a time. Before I realized what I was doing, my phone was in my hand. I called Callista. She answered with that drawl she used whenever she was inconvenienced, half bored, half annoyed. Was this on purpose? I asked, the words sharper than I intended. What are you talking about, the album? His dressing room. All of it. A sigh flat and rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for me to unravel. You're reading too much into it. You always do this. Get overly sensitive and make everyone else uncomfortable. It's exhausting. I bit back the words rising in my throat. She didn't stop. Look, weddings are about optics. No one wants to see you two sipping tea or watching documentaries. That's not the aesthetic. People want polished moments. Vision, not awkward candids. You mean real life? I said softly. She didn't acknowledge it. Whatever. Do you? But don't make it my problem if your vibe doesn't fit the vision. And then she hung up, leaving only the empty buzz of the disconnected line pressed against my ear. I sat there long after holding the phone like it might still carry her voice. But it wasn't just about Leland anymore. It was about me. They weren't only erasing him, they were testing how long I'd stand by while I erased myself too. The phone slipped from my hand onto the cushion. I didn't pick it back up. The silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was taut, stretched like a violin string pulled too tight, humming with the threat of breaking. I sat there until the room dimmed around me, shadows creeping along the walls until the lamp clicked on automatically. Soft light spilling over me, a reminder of some version of order I'd programmed weeks ago and forgotten about. And then came the next evening, the engagement dinner. Another stage, another performance, another version of love, choreographed by Callista under the guise of sisterhood. The table stretched endlessly, candles flickering in tall glass holders, flowers spilling in every direction. I felt it before I heard it, the subtle venom threaded through the praise. I always thought Omaros would end up with someone bold. You know, the kind who commands a room. But maybe quiet love is safer. Maybe she needs someone to keep her grounded. Scattered laughter rippled across the table. Not loud, not mocking outright. But enough. Enough to press against my ribs, enough to make me feel like every word landed on me. She turned toward me, eyes locking, smile sweet as poison. Love doesn't need logic, right? A few guests murmured. Someone whispered, "Oh wow," under their breath. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or warning. Leland's smile never wavered, but I felt him still. Not tense, not anxious. Just still. Alert, waiting. Callista wasn't finished. We all make choices, she added, lifting her glass high. Let's just hope we don't regret them. That was the line. That was the knife pressed to my chest. I pushed my chair back, not violently, but enough that everyone noticed. I stood. Every eye at the table flicked toward me. The air shifted taut and expectant. Before I could speak, Verlin's voice cut through like polished steel, smooth and dismissive. Let's save the speeches for tomorrow, darling. And just like that, the floor beneath me felt claimed stolen. I sat down slowly, not because I was silenced, but because I wanted them to think I was. Let them have that illusion. I would take my moment later on my terms. After dinner, neither Leland nor I spoke much. The ride home was quiet, filled only with the faint hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional sigh from the engine. At a stoplight, his hand found mine. I let him hold it. The pressure was familiar, grounding a small reassurance in the middle of chaos. Morning came with the scent of fresh florals and crisp linens, the world outside carrying the soft promise of rehearsal. The ceremony was set for 10. I arrived early, notebook in hand, ready to run through cues and notes we had meticulously prepared. Melissa, our violinist, greeted me warmly. We had chosen the processional music together months ago, An understated classical piece Leland loved, soft and intimate, a reflection of us. But the moment she began to play during the entrance test, I froze. The melody was wrong. Not a misstep. Not a forgotten note. Entirely different. Romantic, sweeping, theatrical Callista's engagement song from last year, loud and performative, endless vows embedded in every chord. I turned slowly to Melissa, who stopped mid-measure, panicked. I was told there was a change. She stammered. Your mom submitted it late last night. Said it would better match the ambiance. My eyes found Verlaine near the hydrangea arrangements, arms folded, speaking with a coordinator. She wasn't even watching me. Her smile was calm, confident, controlling the queen of a stage only she could see. I approached the planner quietly, deliberately. That music will not play tomorrow, I said, voice steady but firm. Her eyes widened. Mrs. Ames said, I said. It will not play. Reinstate the original selection, or I walk down to silence. The planner blinked, caught off guard. Of course. I'll fix it right away. Behind me, Callista's voice drifted like perfume designed to distract and provoke. It was just a suggestion. Don't be dramatic. I didn't turn. I didn't respond. She wanted a reaction. I didn't owe her one. That evening after rehearsal, Leland and I slipped into the courtyard behind the estate, away from cameras, planners, and prying eyes. The air had cooled, carrying that humid peach-purple hush that only Georgia summers know how to paint. The sky seemed to stretch in slow, deliberate layers of gold and violet. He sipped from a glass of water. Never wine, never indulgence when he didn't need it, and spoke without looking at me. They don't want this wedding. I didn't ask who he meant. We both knew. They want a version they can frame. He added softly, voice low, deliberate, almost like he was letting me in on a secret. A version of us that could be displayed for their satisfaction, not lived for our love. A story they can tell at brunch, I murmured, nodding slightly. Then in the quiet between us, Leland finally met my eyes. Not soft, not romantic, just steady. A silent agreement passed between us, a recognition that tomorrow would not unfold the way they had meticulously planned. I stood brushing imaginary dust from my dress, letting the gesture feel ritualistic, reclaiming a tiny measure of control. Come on, I said. One more night to pretend. We didn't speak much on the drive to brunch. Leland's hands gripped the wheel eyes fixed on the ribbon of asphalt ahead. I found myself watching his reflection in the passenger side window more than the streets rushing by. There was a subtle shift between us, not distance, not withdrawal, but a tightening, a shared tension that felt like armor. We were no longer just facing them. We were facing them together. The brunch was held at a private golf resort Verlaine frequented, all crisp edges and curated charm. Table linens were stiffer than the smiles draped over them. Every detail meticulously designed, a floral army in the center of the room, a string quartet tucked in the corner, playing songs nobody really listened to, the soft murmur of guests behaving like extras in a carefully directed scene. Our names were printed in calligraphy at each place setting. Mine read bride-to-be, Leland's guest of honor. A quiet, deliberate slight, the title of fiancé was apparently too generous. As we approached the head of the table, a server handed me a large square box wrapped in ivory paper, a bow sculpted like it belonged in a gallery. A gold foil tag read, "From the Ames family with love." I already knew whatever lay inside wasn't love. Verlaine seated perfectly. Champagne flute poised, gestured with that rehearsed elegance of hers. Go on, darling. Open it. All eyes were on us. I peeled back the paper with slow, deliberate precision. The lid lifted to reveal a hardbound book, The Modern Husband: How to Lead Without Overstepping. Nestled beside it in cream tissue paper, a plastic razor set the kind hotels supply for one-time use, and a small card that read, "Because appearances matter." A hush fell. Then a few polite chuckles. A titter of laughter rippled across the table. A smattering of amused voices from the far end. They thought it clever public shaming dressed up as wit. Verlaine raised her glass voice, carrying across the room. We just want to set him up for success. It's all in good fun. Leland didn't laugh. He lifted the book, studied it for a beat, then set it gently back in the box. calm, steady. Champagne in hand, the train of her dress sweeping like a river of silk, she glided behind me. No greeting, no warmth. She sipped slowly, eyes on the mirror, her presence filling the room. "Just don't frown too much," she said softly, almost playful, almost venomous. "People might think you're marrying him out of pity." I didn't answer immediately. My fingers moved carefully over the veil, adjusting the comb, making sure it held. My reflection stared back at me, still calm, unyielding. She wanted a reaction. I didn't owe her one. Then I turned slowly, letting my gaze linger on her. What do they think of a sister who needs a mirror to feel big? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Callista's smile didn't falter, but I noticed the subtle tightening of her fingers around the champagne glass, a tiny crack in the perfect facade. "Relax," she said, voice airy, almost dismissive. "It's your big day." "No," I replied, holding her gaze until I could feel it dig beneath the surface. "It's the last day I let any of you decide who I am." She blinked once. Just once. And then she stepped back, gliding away like a shadow retreating from sunlight, leaving the room charged with the weight of words unspoken. Evening settled over the estate like a quiet curtain, draping every surface in soft gold and shadow. The last light of the sun filtered through the tall windows of my suite as I met the wedding planner for one final run-through. She read over the updated run sheet, her voice polite and professional, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway where Verlaine stood, speaking with guests radiating that curated perfection I'd spent a lifetime learning to distrust. I walked past the planner, my steps deliberate, and intercepted her mid-sentence. "If anyone here tries to gift Leland another lesson," I said, voice low but sharp, "we leave. That includes jokes, cards, speeches, or cute little boxes." Verlaine turned slowly to face me, fully, every inch of her posture rehearsed, every tone of her syrupy voice calculated. "Is that how you speak to your mother?" I didn't flinch. "It's how I speak to someone who forgot how to be one." She blinked twice, but said nothing. Silence was her concession. I didn't wait for any more reaction. I turned and walked away, my veil trailing behind me like a quiet verdict, each step a reclamation of self. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Her silence spoke enough. By the time I reached the courtyard, the string quartet had begun warming up under the soft glow of the patio lights. The air was cool, perfumed with magnolia and night-blooming jasmine. The rehearsal dinner had already started. Guests mingled with forced smiles, wine glasses clinking, camera shutters clicking in a rhythm that felt alien mechanical. Every detail was curated, but none of it felt like mine. Leland stood near the center fountain, calm and composed, speaking quietly with our coordinator. From my vantage point, I watched him, the same quiet steadiness, jaw-tight posture, taut, yet effortless. He seemed to sense what was coming before I did, and in that moment I felt the invisible tether between us tighten. A few minutes later, the toasts began. We were seated beneath the sprawling magnolia tree, its branches brushing the sky, a long banquet table draped in ivory linen. Candles flickered in crystal holders, casting reflections like tiny specters across polished surfaces. Callista gave her speech first. Short, bubbly, and sterile words lifted from a bridal magazine, true love her person forever. Pretty, but hollow. Then Dorian rose. He didn't raise his glass immediately. He scanned the length of the table, voice measured, calm, deliberately firm. "Marriage," he said, "isn't about being equals. It's about knowing your place in the story." Guests exchanged glances, some amused, some nervous. I held my breath. "Some people hold the pen," he continued, "and others just edit quietly." A ripple of laughter ran through the center of the table, not cruel, not loud, but complicit. Then he turned to Leland, finally lifting his glass. "Thank you, son, for fitting in." Leland didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't even shift. I stood. The room froze. Noise stopped almost immediately. I didn't shout. I didn't slam anything. I simply looked at my father evenly with a quiet precision honed from years of restraint. I don't remember asking for an edit. No laughter, no reaction. Someone coughed, a chair scraped the concrete floor, then just silence. Dorian lowered his glass, mutely acknowledging my words without acknowledgement. I sat again not because I was finished, but because I wanted them to wonder to anticipate what would come next. Dinner continued with that brittle cadence conversations restarting in halting polite tones. Silverware tapped nervously against plates. I sipped my wine but tasted nothing. My mind was elsewhere, calculating, observing, waiting. As dessert was served, I glanced at Leland. He was staring at his wine glass, turning it slowly between his fingers. "What is it?" I whispered. He tilted the base toward me. Faintly etched into the bottom were the initials VA. I scanned the table. No other glasses bore markings, only his. He set it down, seemingly about to ignore it. I reached for the glass, lifting it gently from his hand, and swapped it with mine. He looked at me, brow furrowed in confusion, but there was no reprimand, no complaint. Just a moment, a silent acknowledgement that we were no longer playing their game. I said nothing. Just lifted the wine glass, letting the rich red liquid coat my tongue before swallowing in a long, steady sip. Then I turned my gaze slowly toward my mother, who sat 4 seats down, animatedly gesturing in conversation with her brother. She didn't notice me at first, or perhaps she did and chose to ignore it. But then her eyes flicked up. Our eyes met. And in that instant, I didn't smile with warmth. I smiled with precision, sharp and unflinching. This wasn't a message. It was a warning. She felt it. She knew it. Later, as guests began trickling into the main hall for dancing and drinks, I slipped away into the hallway, craving air that wasn't perfumed by orchestrated laughter or the faint echo of clinking glasses. The house had quieted except for a soft trail of jazz leaking from the reception room notes fading into shadow. A voice came from behind me. "You're doing more than surviving them." I turned. Mrs. Halvers, my middle school history teacher, stood there. Her bob haircut was just as sharp, her pearl earrings still gleaming, but her eyes had softened, carrying a gentle strength earned from years and experience. Or maybe wisdom. "I see it," she said. "I know what it looks like when someone starts to wake up." I nodded, unsure what to say, my throat tight with unspoken tension. "You don't owe them silence anymore," she added. "I'm not planning to?" I replied, my voice calm but steady. She smiled, just a quiet, knowing smile. "Good." For a moment, we stood like that. 2 women in a hallway, the past and the present colliding softly, each carrying pieces of a story that had always been larger than any single moment. Then she left, fading into the dimly lit corridor like a memory returning to its place. I walked back toward the dining room, but I didn't rejoin the party. I slipped outside, following the garden path, away from the flood of lights, away from the rehearsed laughter, away from the performance of perfection. They thought I was still playing a role. But tomorrow, I would flip the script. I stayed longer in the garden than I intended. The air was thick with dew, cold and heavy against my skin, but I welcomed it. The quiet held me like a shield. I watched as the lights inside the reception hall dimmed one by one, leaving only the soft glow of the exterior sconces. I felt a strange serenity in the emptiness, a readiness forming quietly in my chest. Then slowly I turned toward the house, walking the gravel path one deliberate step at a time, as if each footfall was a closing argument, a final assertion of my agency. By the time I returned to my suite, the staff had begun prepping the venue for the ceremony. There was an energy now. More movement, more whispers, more eyes trained on every corner. I nodded at the night manager as I passed the kitchen corridor, then slipped behind the catering curtains toward the rear hall where the bridal procession would begin. That's when I felt a tug at my train. A young server, barely older than 20, stood beside me, eyes wide with nervous urgency. He held out a folded piece of paper, fingers trembling just enough for me to see. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but I think you should see this." I took it from him, unfolding the note with deliberate care. The words were typed in a stark, impersonal font. "They told us to watch the groom. Don't trust him. If he does anything suspicious, report it immediately. No name, no context. Just instructions." I held the paper in my hands, the edges crisp, and for a moment the quiet of the hallway deepened. The garden, the lights, the soft hum of the night. All of it fell away, leaving only that single unsettling truth in my palm. Tomorrow nothing would be the same. At the bottom of the note, the words were simple, almost clinical. I thought you should know. I looked up at him, searching his eyes for something: hesitation, fear, maybe even regret. Who gave this order? I asked, voice low, steady. He swallowed hard, the tension visible in the way his shoulders tightened. One of the planners, he admitted. She said it came from your mother. I nodded once, slow and deliberate, folding the note carefully before tucking it into the bodice of my dress. It felt heavy against my chest, but not in a suffocating way, more like a reminder, a spark of clarity. Thank you, I said softly. He looked like he wanted to say more, perhaps warn me further, but he didn't. A few minutes later, I found the head planner near the seating chart display, clipboard in hand, directing a florist with sharp gestures. I waited, watching until she finished, then stepped forward, each step measured and firm. Effective immediately, I said, voice carrying calm but authoritative. No staff are to take instruction about my husband from anyone but me. That includes verbal notes, written directives, or back hallway whispers. Are we clear? She blinked, caught completely off guard. Of course, I wasn't aware of... I am now, I interrupted, turning on my heel and walking away before she could recover. Back in the suite, the final steam press was being applied to my dress, the fabric glinting in the soft light. Callista had texted me asking if she should pop by with lip gloss and good vibes. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I stepped into the hallway and found Verlaine waiting. She stood by the service door near the elevator, arms folded, posture rigid, like she'd been expecting me all along. She nodded toward the empty lounge. Can we talk? She asked. I didn't respond verbally, but I followed, letting her lead me into the dimly lit room. The piano from the reception hall below drifted up a soft, muffled melody that carried both history and tension in its notes. You used to listen? She said. Voice low, almost intimate. Now, you're acting like a stranger. Maybe I said, my voice steady. I finally started hearing myself. She let out a quiet scoff, almost dismissive. You never fight back. You've always let things go. That's why we didn't worry. I paused, letting the weight of her words hang, then spoke slowly, clearly, letting each one land. Then worry now. Her expression faltered for a fraction of a second, just enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Her silence said everything. When I stepped out of that room, I didn't feel lighter. I felt focused. There's a difference. I walked directly to the east veranda where Leland waited with the planner and Raya, our photographer. I gathered them in a quiet corner away from the bustle, the rehearsed chaos of preparation. We move forward. I said, calm but unyielding, but we do it on my terms. No changes, no surprises. If anyone so much as adjusts a chair without asking me, I end it publicly. The planner nodded, caught but compliant. Raya didn't flinch, camera already hanging ready at her side. Leland looked at me for a long, quiet moment. Then he smiled, not amusement, not teasing, but recognition. He placed his hand over mine, firm and certain. Let's do it your way, he said. I exhaled, not because I needed relief, but because for the first time I felt ready not to prove anything, but simply to act. That evening, just before the guests arrived, I walked the full length of the ceremony aisle alone, not inspecting decor, not worrying about arrangement, rehearsing presence. They thought they knew the ending, but I had already written a different one in my mind. The morning sun had begun filtering through the garden trees when I stepped out of the dressing room. The air was unusually still for a Georgia summer day, as if the sky itself were holding its breath, watching. Every chair was lined in perfect rows. Petals lay scattered along the aisle in deliberate, soft arcs. Classical music played gently, the kind that goes unnoticed until it stops. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't walking into anyone else's story anymore. This was mine. But I remembered everything. Every insult, every whispered directive, every carefully orchestrated lesson meant to remind me of my place. Guests were already arriving, champagne flutes in hand, laughing politely, posing for photos with the sort of ease that comes from rehearsed smiles. Leland stood near the altar, shaking hands quietly, nodding graciously at each person who approached. He looked like calm personified, yet I could read the tension beneath the surface, the subtle way he smoothed his tie again and again, as if trying to make order out of the chaos surrounding us. Callista was everywhere at once, working the crowd like a candidate on a campaign trail, laughing too loudly, gesturing with too much precision. Verlaine floated among the guests with the measured grace of a social diplomat, as though this were a charity gala staged in her honor, not my wedding. Dorian leaned against a pillar, drink in hand, eyes scanning, always scanning, cataloging. I stayed hidden behind the curtain with Raya and the planner for a moment longer, letting the murmurs and clinking glasses wash over me. My veil had been removed. I'd told them I didn't want it. "You sure?" the planner asked gently. "Completely," I said, voice steady. Then the music shifted. A cue. The efficient and old friend of Leland's from law school stepped to the microphone. His voice rang out warm, formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered today to witness the union of." I stepped out before he could finish. All heads turned immediately, forks paused, mid-air glasses still in hand. The room, so carefully composed, stilled in anticipation. I walked down the aisle, slowly past the rows of pristine white chairs, past guests frozen in polite surprise, past my mother's smile that faltered mid-expression. I reached the microphone and took it into my hand with deliberate calm. "I was raised to believe that family is forever," I began. My voice didn't shake, though it carried every ounce of tension and resolve I had felt for years. But I've learned that sometimes family is just the first script you're handed and you don't have to keep reading it. Whispers rippled through the room, then silence. I looked toward the crowd, locking eyes with Verlaine, Dorian, and Callista. To my mother, "My father, my sister, you are no longer my family." Gasps broke through the hush. Some people straightened in their seats, posture rigid with shock. Others dropped their gaze, entirely unwilling to meet the eyes of a woman who had just taken her voice back. I didn't pause. This wedding, this entire show was never about love. I continued, voice gaining strength. It was about optics, about control, about shaping something to look good in photographs even if it was rotting underneath. I turned to Leland. His calm presence anchored me, but I didn't rely on it. I spoke for both of us now. "You've been patient. You've been disrespected. You've been erased. And yet you stayed because you believed in us. And I do too. So today I am not marrying into a family that never wanted me to choose freely. I am choosing you. Not with permission, but with clarity." Leland stepped forward, meeting me halfway. He took my hand gently, firmly, a quiet promise in his touch. I didn't wait for applause, there wasn't any. Just the stunned silence of a room that had expected compliance and received defiance instead. I inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. The altar, the music, the crowd, it all faded into background noise. In that moment, there was only him and the choice I had finally claimed for myself. And then from the third row, a voice called out clear and sharp against the murmurs of the guests. "Wait, Leland Halbrook." I turned startled by the interruption, and my eyes found Jolene Wathbone, Callista's college friend. She stood there wide-eyed, almost trembling with excitement or disbelief, I couldn't tell which. "You're the guy who testified before Congress about corporate reform. Helix Corporation, right? I saw you in Forbes." The words hit like a cold gust of wind sweeping through the carefully curated stillness of the ceremony. Heads turned, conversations stilled. Verlaine sank back into her chair, suddenly inert, the poised facade cracking just slightly. Callista blinked rapidly as if someone had splashed ice water across her face. Dorian's eyes dropped to the perfectly manicured grass beneath him. Leland didn't puff out his chest. He didn't offer a grin or a boast. He simply met the room with quiet authority, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. "That part of me was never hidden," he said calmly, voice steady, carrying weight even over the soft string music. "You just never bothered to look." The room held its breath. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was earned. Every guest, every judgment, every pretense seemed to fall away, leaving only truth and presence. I turned back to the microphone, feeling the weight and freedom of it all. "This ceremony is over." The words left my lips without hesitation. The wedding had never been real to them, but this choice, this moment, was mine. I handed the mic back to the officiant, whose hands trembled slightly, unsure if they should applaud or let the moment linger. Then I reached for Leland's hand, feeling the warmth and the certainty there. Together we walked away, past the meticulously arranged chairs, past the frozen faces of those who thought they controlled the script, past the pre-approved playlist, still humming in the background. A few friends rose, murmuring encouragement, and followed. Most stayed seated, unsure what to do with the rupture we'd caused. No one tried to stop us. As we stepped off the garden path and into the gravel of the parking lot, I turned back once. Verlaine was standing there, back row, still seated in her immovable poise. Not angry, not embarrassed, just emptied. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need her to understand me. I didn't need her to approve. I just needed her to watch me leave. That was enough. The drive home was quiet, not the kind of hollow silence that feels oppressive, but the kind that carries weight like the final word in a long argument. A truth that no one dares speak over. Leland's hand stayed on mine the entire ride. He didn't squeeze. He didn't stroke. He just held it steady and patient. And that steadiness alone was a kind of reassurance I hadn't known I'd been craving. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen tiles, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt like ours, like it belonged to no one but us. Coffee percolated warm and fragrant, and the air smelled of calm. We moved through the morning quietly, handing each other sugar, folding the newspaper with habitual motions that suddenly felt comforting instead of foreign. Leland leaned back against the counter cup of coffee cradled in his hands, watching the steam curl upward. "You didn't just walk out on them," he said softly. "You walked into yourself." I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. "I didn't need a witness for that," I murmured, but the quiet acknowledgement in his presence made it sweeter, fuller. We shared a small, lingering smile, one that didn't stretch across our faces but rested deep behind ribs and heartbeats. By noon, the inbox was full. Texts, missed calls. A few polite voicemails from people pretending they hadn't exactly heard what I'd said. I let them pile up untouched. What I needed to say couldn't fit into a thread of notifications. It needed paper, ink, space. I sat down at the desk with a sheet of thick, pristine stationery. I didn't rehearse. I didn't revise. I wrote from the raw edge of my voice. "Dear Verlaine Dorian Callista, I do not hate you. I simply no longer let you define me. For years, I measured myself by how closely I could meet your expectations, how quietly I could carry disappointment, how gracefully I could vanish when my voice made you uncomfortable. But I've learned something essential. Silence isn't loyalty. It's an eraser. And I am done disappearing. I hope one day you look back and understand what your version of love cost me, not because I need an apology, but because I hope it makes you gentler to someone else. Until then, I carry forward. I set the pen down and felt a weight lift, not from forgiveness, not from vindication, but from reclaiming the self I had been hiding for far too long. Not as your daughter, not as your sister, not as the person you imagine me to be, but as my own woman. I folded the letter with deliberate care, letting my fingers linger over the edges. No perfume, no ribbon, no fanfare. Just words and the quiet assertion of a self reclaimed. I mailed it without ceremony, as if sending a piece of myself into the world without asking for acknowledgement in return. A week passed. No reply arrived. No words came back to me. But I heard what I needed to hear elsewhere. Raya met me in the city, the bustling streets and honking taxis, a stark contrast to the stillness I carried inside. She brought the final album wrapped simply in canvas. No frills, no gilded monograms. Just weight. Memory. Reality preserved. I know this isn't the one they wanted. Raya said softly, sliding it across the table to me. I let my hands hover over it before opening. Each page turned slowly, deliberately. Photo after photo, me and Leland caught in moments they would never curate. Laughing in the rain during our engagement shoot, cooking together in our sunlit kitchen, swinging gently on the porch on lazy Sunday mornings. Real life. Not posed, not polished, not meant for approval. Just us. It's small, Raya said, her voice gentle, almost reverent. But it's yours. I looked up at her, and in that simple affirmation, I felt the weight of a lifetime lift slightly from my shoulders. That's all I ever needed. A life that is undeniably mine. We flipped one final page. There, centered alone, was a photo of me. Veil off, sunlight in my hair, eyes forward, unflinching. Not glamorous, not staged, honest. No caption, no explanation, just space, just presence. I closed the album, letting my palms rest flat against the cover as if pressing my claim to it to myself. Outside the cafe window, the world continued without pause. Cars moved. Pedestrians walked. People passed without noticing. And maybe that was the point. I didn't need to be watched. I didn't need to be judged. I only needed to be seen, truly seen by the person who mattered most to me. Some families are made of names. Others are made of choices. I had made mine. Before I let this moment, this story settle into memory, I want to say this, not just as someone who endured it, but as someone who walked through it and came out whole. Sometimes the loudest strength isn't the one that slams doors or raises voices. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the strength that chooses self-respect over approval. It's the courage that walks away from a table where love is conditional, where dignity is negotiable. Family isn't always the people you were born to. Sometimes it's the space you carve for yourself, the life you decide is yours and yours alone. And that finally is the life I claim. Own path. You get to choose your boundaries, your happiness, and your people. You get to decide what love looks like for you, not what anyone else tells you it should be. Remember, strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet act of standing tall when everyone else expects you to bow. Sometimes it's walking away from what isn't right, so you can make room for what is. So take a deep breath, honor your choices, and never apologize for claiming your space in this world. You are allowed to build your own table and invite only the people who truly see and respect you. And if you've been there, if you've ever had to protect your peace over pleasing others, I want to hear about it. Share your story, leave a 1 if this resonates, or tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single comment, and your experiences matter. Subscribe for more stories that cut deep, heal slow, and remind us all that our lives are ours to live. Until next time. Keep your head high, your heart strong, and remember the power to choose is always yours.